The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Fifth Avenue as Nasser Al-Farhan stepped out of his modest Uber. Unlike many of his wealthy peers, Nasser preferred simplicity when traveling alone. No flashy cars, no bodyguards, no fanfare. Just a man in a well-tailored suit with kind eyes that had seen both poverty and abundance. He paused for a moment outside LeBlanc, straightening his tie, a habit from his early days when he'd interview for jobs he was repeatedly told he was unqualified for. 20 years and several $billion later, the habit remained. His watch, a gift from his late father, was the only truly expensive item visible to strangers. The rest of his wealth he kept where he believed it mattered, invested in people, not appearances. "Reservation for 7:30, he said quietly to the young woman at the front desk, whose eyes barely flickered upward as she scanned the list. "Name?" she asked, her tone suggesting she was already certain he wouldn't be on it. "Al-Farhan." Her perfectly manicured finger slid down the page, paused, then continued. "I don't see it here." Nasser nodded patiently. "Perhaps under Farhan Technologies?" "My assistant made the booking last week." The woman sighed, checked again, then reluctantly found the entry. "Oh, there it is." No apology followed. She snapped her fingers at a passing server. "Table 14. The server, a young man with tired eyes, gave Nasser a quick once-over, then gestured toward the back of the restaurant. "This way." As they walked through the dimly lit space, Nasser noticed how the server stopped to warmly greet other diners. "Mr. Davidson, lovely to see you again. And Mrs. Keller, your usual table is ready." The contrast wasn't lost on him. These little moments of recognition and belonging that were casually withheld from him. Table 14 was exactly what Nasser had expected. Close to the kitchen doors, away from the windows, hidden behind a large pillar. A table for people who didn't matter. "Someone will be with you shortly," the server said, already turning away. Nasser settled into his chair and took in his surroundings. LeBlanc had opened 6 months ago to rave reviews and impossible reservations. The head chef had trained in Paris, the interior designer had won awards, and the wine list was reportedly exceptional. From his hidden corner, Nasser watched as the restaurant staff performed an elaborate dance of attention and service. For others. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. No menu, no water, no acknowledgement. At another table, a family was being treated to an elaborate explanation of the evening's specials, complete with enthusiastic hand gestures from their waiter. At yet another, complimentary champagne was being poured as the guests laughed with the sommelier. Nasser pulled out his phone and checked his messages. 3 new investment proposals, an update on the clean water project in Sudan, and a photo from his nephew who had just won a science competition. He smiled at the last one and sent a quick congratulatory reply. His family kept him grounded, reminded him of where they'd all started and how far they'd come. 20 minutes now. Still no service. A waiter rushed past, nearly clipping Nasser's shoulder without apology. From his table, Nasser could see the kitchen doors swinging open and closed, catching glimpses of the organized chaos within. The head chef appeared occasionally, personally delivering plates to certain tables with a flourish and a bow. Nasser wasn't angry. This wasn't the first time he'd been invisible, and it wouldn't be the last. Growing up in a small village outside Dubai, before the city became synonymous with luxury, he'd learned early that people made quick judgments. Later, as a student in America, he'd experienced plenty of evenings sitting alone in cafeterias or being the last picked for group projects despite having the highest grades. What interested him now, as a businessman who had built his fortune on understanding people, was watching how places revealed their true character. LeBlanc was showing him exactly who they were, without realizing who he was. At the 25-minute mark, Nasser caught the eye of a passing server, different from the first one. "Excuse me," he said politely. The server looked startled, as if just noticing the table was occupied. "Yes, I haven't received a menu yet. Or water." The server frowned. "Who seated you?" "I'm not sure of his name. About 25 minutes ago." "Right, sorry about that. I'll be right back." Another 10 minutes passed before a menu appeared, dropped hastily at his table by a third server who didn't introduce himself or offer any of the warm explanations Nasser had observed at other tables. By now, Nasser had begun to find the situation almost amusing. He'd built his reputation on seeing opportunities where others saw nothing. Right now, he was seeing quite a lot about LeBlanc's approach to hospitality. The restaurant's owner, a tall man with an expensive haircut, was making rounds. He stopped at a table of 4 well-dressed women, kissing cheeks and pouring wine himself. At another table, he clasped the shoulder of an older gentleman, leaning in for an intimate conversation. He moved from table to table like a politician at a fundraiser, somehow always facing away from Nasser's corner. When a waiter finally took his order, a full 45 minutes after he'd been seated, Nasser requested the chef's signature dish and a glass of water. The waiter didn't write it down or repeat it back as he'd done for other tables. "Is the chef's special good?" Nasser asked, attempting conversation. "Everything is good," the waiter replied flatly, already stepping away. From his corner, Nasser continued his observations. A couple celebrating an anniversary received a complimentary dessert with a candle. A group of business people clinked glasses as the owner joined them for a toast. A family with teenagers was given a tour of the kitchen. When his food arrived, 15 minutes after people who had ordered after him, it was lukewarm. The presentation, which he had seen was normally elaborate, was hasty. No explanation of the dish was offered. No pepper or additional seasoning suggested. The waiter set it down and disappeared. Nasser took a bite. Despite everything, the food was good. Not exceptional as the reviews had claimed, but good. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, continuing his study of the restaurant's dynamics. At the table nearest to him, a group of finance types was loudly discussing a recent acquisition. "Absolute steal," one of them boasted. The Arabs had no idea what they were selling. Nasser smiled to himself. He knew exactly which deal they were referring to. His company had been the silent partner behind the buyer. "Apparently the new tech is revolutionary," another said. "Stock's going to skyrocket once they announce. Who even knows about this stuff over there? They've got oil money. They don't need to understand technology." Nasser sipped his water, remembering how he'd built his first computer at 11, how he'd written his first piece of commercial software at 16, how he'd earned his PhD in computer engineering before starting his company. Their assumptions about Arabs were as misguided as LeBlanc's assumptions about him as he finished his meal. No, one had come to check if he needed anything or to offer the dessert menu that other tables received. Automatically, Nasser noticed a commotion near the bar. A glass had fallen, splashing red wine across the pristine floor. The restaurant briefly fell silent, then resumed its buzz as if nothing had happened. From a door near the kitchen emerged a man in a gray uniform carrying a mop and bucket. His movements were quick but careful as he made his way to the spill. Like Nasser, he seemed practiced at being invisible, working efficiently while disturbing no one. The man knelt to clean the spill, his back to Nasser. There was something in his careful movements, in the dignity with which he performed his task, that caught Nasser's attention. Here was someone else the restaurant looked past. Someone else whose humanity was secondary to their function. As the man finished and stood to leave, he accidentally backed into Nasser's table, jolting it slightly. He turned quickly, his eyes wide with concern. "Ana Asif." "Yazidi," he said automatically. "I am sorry, sir," in perfect Arabic. The words hung in the air between them, a sudden bridge across the invisible barriers of the evening. For the first time since entering LeBlanc, Nasser felt truly seen. And in that moment, everything was about to change. The surprise of hearing his native tongue in this cold, unwelcoming place made Nasser's face light up. For a brief moment, he forgot about the hour he'd spent being overlooked. "La mushkila," Nasser replied warmly in Arabic. "No problem." The cleaner froze, clearly not expecting a response in his own language. He straightened up, finally looking directly at Nasser's face. "You speak Arabic?" the man asked, still in their shared language. "Since before I could walk," Nasser smiled. "I'm from outside Dubai originally. And you, Beirut, but I've been here 15 years now." The man glanced nervously toward the kitchen, aware he wasn't supposed to chat with customers. "I should go. What's your name?" Nasser asked quickly. "Mahmoud," he answered, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I'm Nasser. Pleased to meet someone who isn't looking through me tonight." Mahmoud's eyes crinkled slightly, understanding exactly what Nasser meant. He'd seen how the staff had been treating this quiet, well-dressed man from his homeland. A sharp voice cut through their moment of connection. Hassan, we need you in the kitchen immediately. The floor manager stood with hands on hips, glaring at Mahmoud. They never bothered to learn my actual name, Mahmoud said quietly in Arabic, shaking his head slightly. Always Hassan, or sometimes just hey you. With an apologetic nod to Nasser, he gathered his cleaning supplies and hurried toward the kitchen. Nasser watched him go, then turned back to his half-eaten meal. The food had grown completely cold now. He pushed the plate aside, no longer interested in the restaurant's acclaimed cuisine. What he'd witnessed tonight was far more enlightening than any dish could be. A new waiter appeared suddenly at his table, this one with an eager smile that hadn't been there before. Is everything to your satisfaction, sir? Nasser looked up, mildly surprised at the attention. The food has gotten cold. Oh, I'm terribly sorry. Let me take that away and bring you a fresh plate, on the house, of course. The waiter whisked away the dish before Nasser could respond. Puzzled by the abrupt change in service, Nasser glanced around. Nothing seemed different except… The restaurant owner was now looking directly at him from across the room, giving a small nod of acknowledgement. So someone had finally recognized him. It happened occasionally. His company had been in the business news lately after their latest acquisition. But Nasser doubted that was the case here. More likely, Mahmoud had mentioned something to the kitchen staff about the Arabic-speaking guest, and someone had made the connection. The owner was now making his way toward Nasser's table, weaving between the other diners with practiced grace. His smile grew wider with each step. Mr. Al-Farhan, he said, extending his hand as he reached the table. Philippe Bouvier. I own LeBlanc. I've just been informed of your presence, and I must apologize for not greeting you personally earlier. Nasser shook the offered hand lightly. No need to apologize. I've been having quite an educational evening observing your restaurant. Something in Nasser's tone made Philippe's smile falter slightly. I do hope everything has been satisfactory. Actually, I've been sitting here for over an hour with minimal service. My food arrived cold. No one checked on me. Nasser stated these facts calmly, without anger. Until your cleaning staff member and I spoke in Arabic, I might as well have been invisible. Felipe's face flushed. I cannot apologize enough. There must have been a terrible misunderstanding with your reservation. We pride ourselves on impeccable service to all our guests, especially someone of your standing. My standing? Nasser raised an eyebrow. And what standing is that exactly? Well, that is, Philippe stumbled over his words. You're Nasser Al-Farhan of Farhan Technologies. Your company just acquired Neurotech Solutions last month. It was in all the papers. Yes, that's correct. Nasser nodded. But when I arrived, you didn't know who I was, did you? I was just another man with brown skin and an accent. Philippe opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. Both men knew the truth. Please, allow me to make this right, Philippe finally said. Your dinner is completely on the house tonight, and we would be honored if you would consider us for your company's event next month. I understand you're hosting potential investors? Nasser tilted his head slightly. How did you know about that? One of our regular patrons mentioned it. Banking circles? Philippe waved his hand vaguely. We would provide a special menu, private dining room, our finest service. I see. Nasser's voice was quiet. And this special treatment would be because you deserve only the best, of course, Philippe exclaimed. Because I'm wealthy, Nasser corrected. Not because I'm human. There's a difference. Before Philippe could respond, the waiter returned with a steaming plate of the chef's special, arranged much more carefully than the first serving had been. Your fresh dinner, sir. And the chef has included a special appetizer as well. He set down a small plate of delicate pastries beside the main dish. Thank you, Nasser said to the waiter, who now seemed determined to hover attentively. That will be all for now. As the waiter retreated, Nasser turned back to Philippe. You know, I started with nothing. My father was a teacher who could barely afford our small apartment. When I came to America for university, I worked 3 jobs to pay for my books. I know what it feels like to be unseen. Philippe shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Al-Farhan, I assure you, the only person in your restaurant who treated me like a human being tonight was your cleaner, Nasser continued. The man you call Hassan, although his name is Mahmoud. He didn't know who I was. He didn't care about my net worth. He simply saw another person who spoke his language. Across the restaurant, Mahmoud had emerged from the kitchen again. He was carefully wiping down an empty table, his movements efficient and practiced. Nasser watched him for a moment. "How long has he worked for you?" Nasser asked. Philippe followed his gaze. "The cleaning staff?" "I'm not sure. They're contracted through a service." "He's been here 3 years," came a quiet voice. The hostess who had initially seated Nasser now stood nearby, having overheard the conversation. "He works 2 other jobs. Has 3 kids in college?" Philippe looked at her in surprise, clearly unaware that his staff knew such details about the cleaning crew. "Thank you," Nasser nodded to her. "What's your name?" "Chen," she replied, looking nervous about interrupting but determined all the same. "And I should have been more welcoming when you arrived." "I'm sorry," Nasser gave her a genuine smile. "Thank you, Chen, I appreciate that." Philippe cleared his throat. "Mr. Al-Farhan, please enjoy your meal. Everything is on the house tonight, of course. And do consider us for your company event. I'll have my assistant call your office tomorrow to discuss details." As Philippe walked away, Nasser noticed a new energy rippling through the restaurant. Staff members were stealing glances his way. Other diners were whispering, having caught on that someone important was in their midst. The invisible man was suddenly the center of attention. Nasser took a bite of the freshly prepared meal. It was indeed excellent. The chef clearly knew his craft. But the experience had been soured by what he'd witnessed. True hospitality, Nasser believed, wasn't about recognizing wealth or status. It was about recognizing humanity. He ate slowly, watching as the dynamics of the restaurant continued to shift around him. The owner had personally visited his table twice more, offering complimentary dessert, special wines, anything he might desire. Waiters checked on him every few minutes. Even other diners were finding excuses to walk past his table, curious about the man who had caused such a stir. Through it all, Mahmoud continued his work quietly, moving from table to table, now visible to Nasser in a way that he wasn't to anyone else. Once their eyes met briefly across the room, and Mahmoud gave a small nod of acknowledgement. When Nasser had finished his meal, he declined dessert and asked for the check, despite Philippe's insistence that everything was complimentary. "I prefer to pay for what I receive," Nasser said firmly, "and I'd like to add something to the bill." The waiter looked confused. "Sir?" "I'd like to add a personal tip for Mahmoud, the gentleman from the cleaning staff who spoke with me earlier." Now the waiter looked truly alarmed. I'm not sure our system allows that. The cleaning staff isn't part of our regular—" "Then I'll handle it directly," Nasser said, rising from his table. He placed enough cash on the table to cover his meal and a generous tip for the waiter, then walked toward the kitchen area where he had last seen. Mahmoud's several staff members watched with wide eyes as Nasser, now recognized as an important guest, breached the unspoken boundary between dining room and service areas. No one quite dared to stop him. He found Mahmoud rinsing mops in a back area, sleeves rolled up and hands submerged in soapy water. "Mahmoud," Nasser said quietly. The cleaner turned, surprise evident on his face. "Mr. Al-Farhan, is everything okay?" "I wanted to thank you before I left," Nasser said in Arabic. "You were the only real person I met tonight." Mahmoud dried his hands on a towel, looking embarrassed by the praise. "I was just doing my job. So was everyone else," Nasser replied. "But you did yours with dignity." He held out a business card. "I'd like to talk with you sometime. About your children and their education. About possibilities." Mahmoud stared at the card, not reaching for it. "Why would someone like you want to talk with someone like me?" Nasser smiled. "Because we're not as different as this place wants us to believe." He placed the card on a dry spot on the counter. "My personal number is on the back. Call me tomorrow." Mahmoud finally took the card, looking at it like it might dissolve in his fingers. "I will," he said softly, then added, "Thank you for seeing me." "Thank you for the same," Nasser replied. With a final nod, he turned and walked back through the restaurant, past the curious stares and the suddenly attentive staff, and out into the cool evening air. As his Uber pulled away from LeBlanc, Nasser made a note in his phone. It wasn't about the restaurant or its food. It was about a man named Mahmoud, whose children were in college, who worked 3 jobs, and who had remembered what too many had forgotten: that wealth and worth were not the same thing. The morning after his experience at LeBlanc, Nasser sat in his hotel suite reviewing emails when his phone rang. The number wasn't in his contacts, and for a moment he considered letting it go to voicemail. His day was already packed with meetings. But something made him answer. "Hello, this is Nasser." A pause then. "Mr. Al-Farhan? This is Mahmoud. From the restaurant last night." Nasser smiled, setting aside his laptop. "Mahmoud, I'm glad you called. And please, just Nasser is fine. I wasn't sure if I should call," Mahmoud said, his voice hesitant. "But my daughter said I would be foolish not to." "Your daughter sounds wise," Nasser replied. "You mentioned she's in college?" "Yes, all 3 of my children are. My oldest, Layla, studies engineering at City College. My son Omar is studying business at Brooklyn Community College. And my youngest, Amira, just started pre-med at Hunter College." Pride warmed Mahmoud's voice as he spoke of his children. "That's impressive," Nasser said genuinely. 3 children in college at once. "You must work very hard." "Always," Mahmoud answered simply. "Education is everything. It's why we came to America." Nasser understood completely. His own father had sacrificed everything to ensure his children could study, could build better lives. "Would you have time to meet today? Perhaps for coffee?" Another pause. "I work at the hospital from 10 until 2. Then I have a few hours before my shift at LeBlanc. How about 3 o'clock? There's a coffee shop called Blue Cup on 42nd Street. Does that work?" "Yes, I can be there," Mahmoud said, still sounding uncertain about why this wealthy businessman wanted to meet with him. "Excellent. I'll see you then." After hanging up, Nasser called his assistant to reschedule his afternoon meetings. Some things were more important than business. He had seen something in Mahmoud, a quiet dignity, a determination that reminded him of his own father. And Nasser had learned long ago to pay attention when such connections appeared. The Blue Cup was half empty when Nasser arrived at 5 minutes to 3. He chose a quiet corner table and ordered 2 coffees, remembering how his father would always say you could tell a lot about a person by how they took their coffee. At precisely 3 o'clock, Mahmoud walked through the door. He had changed from his cleaning uniform into simple but neat clothes, khaki pants and a blue button-down shirt that had been ironed with care. His eyes scanned the cafe until he spotted Nasser, who stood and waved him over. "Thank you for coming," Nasser said as they shook hands. "Please sit." "I took the liberty of ordering coffee, but if you'd prefer something else." "Coffee is perfect." "Thank you." Mahmoud sat stiffly, clearly uncomfortable in these surroundings with this man whose net worth was probably more than he would earn in several lifetimes. Nasser sensed his discomfort and jumped straight to the point. "I want to be clear about why I asked to meet you, Mahmoud. It's not charity or pity. It's because I saw something last night, something I recognized." Mahmoud looked at him questioningly. "I saw a man who works 3 jobs to put his children through college. A man who is treated as invisible, but still carries himself with dignity. A man who speaks to others in their language, literally and figuratively." Nasser leaned forward slightly. "My father was that kind of man." Something in Mahmoud's posture relaxed slightly. "You mentioned your father was a teacher?" "Yes, in a small school outside Dubai. He taught mathematics and English. My mother died when I was young, so he raised 4 children alone, working extra jobs after school and on weekends." Nasser's eyes grew distant with memory. "He wore the same shoes for 10 years so we could have books." Mahmoud nodded slowly, recognition in his eyes. "My father was similar. He drove a taxi in Beirut for 16 hours a day so we could eat and study." The 2 men fell into conversation easily after that, finding common ground in their experiences as immigrants, as sons of hardworking fathers, as men who understood the value of education and opportunity. Their coffee grew cold as they talked about their childhoods, their journeys to America, their dreams for their families. "Tell me more about your children," Nasser said after they'd ordered fresh coffee. "You must be very proud." Mahmoud's whole face transformed when he spoke about his kids. "Layla is like her mother, brilliant, stubborn. She wants to build bridges, real ones, not metaphorical," he laughed. "Omar is the businessman, always making deals since he was small. And Amira, my youngest, has wanted to be a doctor since she was 6 years old and helped a neighbor who had fallen." "And their mother?" Nasser asked gently. Mahmoud's smile faded slightly. "Fatima works as a home health aide. We separated 5 years ago. The strain of working so many jobs, never seeing each other. But we remain friends for the children." Nasser nodded. Success often came with personal costs. This was something else they understood in common. And your family? Mahmoud asked. Are you married? Divorced, Nasser admitted. Similar reasons. My work consumed me for many years. My ex-wife and I are on good terms, though. No children, which is perhaps a blessing given how little time I had to offer. There was no bitterness in his voice, just a quiet acknowledgement of choices made and their consequences. Mahmoud took a sip of his coffee. So what is it you want from me, Nasser? You're a busy man. You don't need new friends who wash floors. The directness of the question made Nasser smile. Actually, I do need friends who see the world clearly, who remember what matters. Last night, I watched how differently people were treated based solely on perceptions of their worth. It reminded me of something important that I've been forgetting lately. And what's that? That the true measure of success isn't in what you gain, but in what you give. My father taught me that. I think your children are learning it from you. Nasser paused. I want to help your children with their education. Mahmoud stiffened again. I don't want charity. Not charity, Nasser corrected quickly. Investment. Your children are already proving themselves through hard work and determination. I'd like to create a scholarship program through my foundation that would cover the remainder of their education costs. And not just for them, but for other students in similar situations. And what would you want in return? Mahmoud's voice was careful, measured. Your insight. Your perspective. Nasser leaned back in his chair. I'm considering expanding my company's educational initiatives. Currently, we fund technology programs in underserved schools, but I've been thinking about creating something more comprehensive, something that addresses the real barriers students face. Not just access to computers, but mentorship, financial security, career pathways. Mahmoud considered this for a long moment. And you think I could help with this? I know you could. You've navigated a system that wasn't designed for your success, yet you've ensured your children's access to education anyway. That knowledge is invaluable, Nasser smiled. Plus, you weren't impressed by my money or my status. Do you know how rare that is in my world? For the first time, Mahmoud laughed openly. I was impressed by your Arabic. It's been a long time since I heard someone speak the coastal dialect from home. Then we have a deal? Your insights for a scholarship program? Mahmoud's expression grew serious again. I need to think about it. To discuss it with my children and their mother. This is unexpected. Of course, Nasser nodded. Take whatever time you need. My offer won't expire. They spoke for another hour, moving from personal histories to discussions of their homelands, of the changes they'd seen in their lifetimes, of the strange experience of belonging to two places at once. When Mahmoud mentioned he needed to leave for his evening shift, Nasser insisted on paying for a taxi to take him to the restaurant. I have one more question, Nasser said as they stepped outside the cafe. Why did you call me? What did you tell your daughter that made her insist you should? Mahmoud looked slightly embarrassed. After you left last night, the owner called all the staff together. He told us who you were, that your company was worth billions, that you might host an important event at Leblanc. He shrugged. When I got home, I searched your name online. Read about your work bringing technology education to rural areas in the Middle East and Africa. That's when I told my daughter about meeting you. And what did she say? She said that sometimes Allah puts people in our path for a reason, that I would be ungrateful to ignore such an opportunity. Mahmoud smiled slightly. Layla has always been wiser than me. Nasser nodded thoughtfully. My father used to say something similar, that coincidences were God's way of remaining anonymous. As they shook hands goodbye, both men felt the strange sense that their meeting had not been chance at all, that the restaurant's prejudice had accidentally created something meaningful. The taxi pulled away with Mahmoud inside, heading back to Leblanc, where he would again become nearly invisible to most of the people there, but not all of them. Not anymore. Nasser watched the taxi disappear into traffic, then pulled out his phone to make a call. It was time to have a more formal conversation with Philippe Bouvier about the event his company was supposedly planning at Leblanc. An event that, until last night, had not actually existed. Now, however, Nasser had an idea about recognition, about visibility, about worth, an idea that would require Philippe's restaurant, and a certain cleaner who spoke Arabic. 2 weeks later, Leblanc was closed to the public for a private event. The restaurant had been transformed with subtle lighting and elegant flowers, but Philippe Bouvier had insisted on keeping the changes minimal. The space speaks for itself, he had told his staff during their pre-event briefing. Tonight is about impressing Mr. Al-Farhan and his guests. Every detail must be perfect. The staff had been handpicked, only the best servers, the most experienced bartenders. Philippe himself would oversee everything, ensuring that nothing went wrong. This event could lead to regular bookings from Farhan Technologies, whose New York office was expanding rapidly. The potential for profit was enormous. What Philippe didn't know, what none of them knew, was exactly who would be attending tonight's dinner. At precisely 7 o'clock, the first guests began to arrive. Philippe stood near the entrance, ready to greet the wealthy investors and tech executives he assumed would be filling his restaurant. Instead, the first person through the door was an older woman in a simple hijab, looking somewhat overwhelmed by the opulent surroundings. "Good evening," Philippe said automatically, though his confusion was evident. "Welcome to LeBlanc." "Thank you," the woman replied with a gentle smile. "It's very beautiful." Before Philippe could ask who she was, more guests arrived. A young man in a slightly too large suit, a middle-aged couple speaking Arabic, 2 teenage girls giggling nervously. None of them matched Philippe's expectations for high-powered business associates. 30 minutes later, the restaurant was filled with about 50 people, a mix of ages and backgrounds, but predominantly Middle Eastern and South Asian families. Philippe moved through the crowd with growing bewilderment, looking for Nasser Al-Farhan or anyone who appeared to be from his company. "Excuse me," he finally asked one of the guests, a man in his 60s. "Are you with Farhan Technologies?" The man laughed warmly. No, I drive a taxi. My son works with Mahmoud at the hospital. That's why we're here, Mahmoud." Philippe repeated, the name only vaguely familiar. "Yes, your cleaning man, the one who's been working here for 3 years." The man gave Philippe a curious look. "Didn't you know this dinner is in his honor?" Before Philippe could process this information, the main doors opened once more and Nasser Al-Farhan entered. Unlike the last time he'd been in LeBlanc, there was no mistaking him now. He carried himself with quiet confidence, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, his presence immediately commanding attention. Behind him came Mahmoud and 3 young adults who bore a strong resemblance to him, clearly his children. They were dressed formally as well, though their clothes were simpler than Nasser's. Mahmoud looked almost unrecognizable outside his cleaning uniform, standing tall and proud beside his family. Philippe hurried over. "Mr. Al-Farhan, welcome back to LeBlanc. We're honored to host your event tonight." He gestured vaguely to the assembled guests. "Though I must admit I'm a bit confused about the guest list." Nasser finished for him, smiling slightly. "Yes, I imagine you are. Allow me to explain." He turned to the crowd who had fallen silent at his entrance. "Everyone, please find your seats. Dinner will be served shortly and then we'll get to the reason we're all here tonight." The guests moved toward the elegantly set tables as Nasser turned back to Philippe. "Mr. Bouvier, I'd like to introduce you properly to Mahmoud Al-Khouri, not as your cleaning staff, but as my honored guest and new business partner." Philippe's eyes widened as he looked at Mahmoud, finally recognizing him without the gray uniform. "Partner? I don't understand." "You will," Nasser assured him. "Now I believe we should join our guests. I've taken the liberty of arranging the seating. You'll be at my table, along with Mahmoud and his family." Philippe found himself being guided to the central table, still struggling to make sense of what was happening. This was not the high-profile business dinner he had anticipated. As they sat down, he leaned toward Nasser. "Mr. Al-Farhan, when you mentioned hosting potential investors, You assumed I meant wealthy people in expensive clothes," Nasser interrupted quietly. "That's exactly the point of tonight, Mr. Bouvier. Assumptions." The dinner service began with the kitchen presenting their finest offerings. Philippe watched in growing discomfort as Mahmoud's friends and family, ordinary working people, taxi drivers, nurses, small shop owners, were served the same exquisite food usually reserved for celebrities and Wall Street executives. What puzzled him most was how Nasser moved among them, engaged in easy conversation, laughing and listening as if these were the most important people in New York. When the main course had been cleared, Nasser stood and tapped his glass gently for attention. The room quieted immediately. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began. "Most of you know why we're here, but for those who don't, allow me to explain." He gestured toward Mahmoud. 2 weeks ago I had dinner in this restaurant. The food was excellent, but the service He paused, glancing at Philippe. Was less impressive. I was largely ignored until someone recognized my name and realized I had money. A few knowing chuckles rippled through the crowd. The only person who treated me with genuine respect that night was Mahmoud, who didn't know or care about my bank account. He simply saw another human being who spoke his language. Nasser smiled at Mahmoud. That moment of connection reminded me of something important, something I learned from my father, but sometimes forget in the world of business that a person's worth has nothing to do with their wealth. He turned to face Mahmoud's children, who were seated beside their father. Layla, Omar, Amira, your father has told me about your studies, your dreams, how he works 3 jobs to ensure you can pursue those dreams. That kind of dedication, that investment in the future, that's the true meaning of wealth. Nasser reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Which brings me to the announcement I wanted to make tonight. Mahmoud and I have been discussing a new initiative over the past 2 weeks. Today I'm pleased to launch the Al Farhan First Generation Scholarship Fund. With an initial endowment of $5 million, a collective gasp went through the room. This fund will provide full scholarships to children of immigrants who are the first in their families to attend college in America. Mahmoud has agreed to serve as the program director, bringing his perspective and experience to ensure the funds go where they're most needed. Mahmoud's children looked at their father in astonishment. Amira grabbed his hand, tears in her eyes. But that's not all, Nasser continued. I've also decided to establish a training center for immigrant workers looking to advance their careers. This center will offer language classes, professional certifications, and job placement assistance. And I'm pleased to announce that this center will be housed in the building my company just purchased, the building right next door to this restaurant. Philippe's jaw dropped. The neighboring building had been sold recently for a staggering sum, making headlines in real estate circles. Which brings me to you, Mr. Bouvier, Nasser said, turning to the restaurant owner. Your establishment will be serving as the official caterer for all our center's events. That is, if you're interested in a contract that would guarantee significant business for years to come. Philippe struggled to find words. Of course, we would be honored. Excellent, Nasser nodded, though there is one condition. Anything, Philippe said quickly. The contract will include a provision requiring LeBlanc to implement a new training and hiring program, focusing on immigrants and underrepresented communities. Nasser's eyes were steady. Everyone deserves a chance to work somewhere besides the cleaning staff, don't you agree? The room had gone completely silent. Philippe swallowed hard, aware that every eye was on him. Yes, he said finally. I agree completely. Nasser smiled and raised his glass. Then let's toast to new beginnings, to seeing people as they truly are, not as we assume them to be. The guests raised their glasses, the atmosphere in the room shifting to one of celebration. As conversations resumed around them, Mahmoud leaned toward Nasser. You didn't tell me about the training center, he said quietly, or about the catering contract. I wanted it to be a surprise, Nasser replied. For everyone. He glanced at Philippe, who was now attempting to make conversation with Mahmoud's son Omar. Some lessons are best learned publicly. Mahmoud shook his head, a mix of disbelief and gratitude on his face. My children's education was enough. More than enough. This is what my father would have wanted me to do with his legacy, Nasser said simply. Use privilege to create opportunity. He never had the chance to do it on this scale, but he did it every day as a teacher. He placed a hand briefly on Mahmoud's shoulder. Besides, I'm not doing this only for you or your community. I'm doing it for myself too. How so? Success can be isolating. It surrounds you with people who only see your money, who only tell you what they think you want to hear. Nasser looked around the room at the genuine joy on the faces of the guests. I need people in my life who will speak truth, who remember where they came from, who see me, not my bank account. Later that evening, as the event was winding down, Philippe approached Nasser at the bar. His earlier confusion had been replaced by a more thoughtful expression. Mr. Al Farhan, he began, I want to thank you for an educational evening. You're welcome, Nasser replied. Though I think your education began 2 weeks ago, when you realized who I was and suddenly found me worthy of your attention. Philippe had the grace to look embarrassed. Yes, about that. I've been thinking, that's good, Nasser interrupted with a small smile. Thinking is where change begins. Yes, Philippe nodded. And I wanted you to know that I'm committed to the training program you suggested. Not just because of the contract, but because you're right. About assumptions. About worth. He looked over at Mahmoud, who was introducing his daughter Layla to another guest. I never even knew his name. Not his real one anyway. You'll learn it now, Nasser said, along with many others. As Philippe walked away, Nasser remained at the bar observing the scene before him. The restaurant that had once made him feel invisible was now filled with people who were often invisible to the world of wealth and privilege. Yet here they were, celebrated and seen. It wasn't a solution to systemic problems, he knew. One night, one scholarship fund, one training center couldn't fix everything. But it was a start. A reminder that change could begin with something as simple as one person speaking to another in their own language, literally and figuratively. And sometimes, that was enough to change everything. 6 months had passed since the night at LeBlanc. The early autumn air carried a hint of coolness as Mahmoud walked up to the gleaming glass doors of the Al Farhan First Generation Center. Even after working here every day for nearly half a year, he still sometimes paused to take in the building. Its modern lines, the welcoming entrance, the large windows that let in abundant natural light. So different from the back entrances and windowless rooms he had been accustomed to throughout his working life. He pressed his ID card against the reader, and the doors slid open silently. In the lobby, a young woman was polishing the brass plaque that had been installed during the center's grand opening. It bore a simple message in both English and Arabic. Everyone deserves to be seen. Good morning, Aisha, Mahmoud greeted her. She looked up with a smile. Morning, Mr. Al-Khoury. Big day today, isn't it? Indeed it is. Mahmoud checked his watch. He had 3 hours before the center would host its first graduation ceremony for the inaugural class of certified nursing assistants, 24 immigrants who had completed the free training program. Among them was his friend Tariq, who had worked alongside him mopping floors at the hospital for 5 years. The center had transformed the lives of hundreds already. Language classes filled up as soon as they were announced. Professional certification programs had waiting lists. The computer lab was constantly busy with people writing resumes, taking online courses, and searching for better jobs. And in the community space, children did homework after school while their parents attended classes. What had begun as a simple chance encounter between a cleaner and a millionaire had grown into something that was changing an entire community. Mahmoud made his way to his office, an actual office with a door and a window, something he'd never had before. On his desk sat a framed photo of his 3 children at Layla's graduation 2 months earlier. She had finished at the top of her engineering class with a job already lined up at a prestigious firm. The photograph showed all 3 of his children laughing together, their faces bright with possibility. He was arranging papers for the day's ceremony when his phone rang. Hello? Mahmoud speaking. Mahmoud, it's Nasser. How are preparations coming along? Despite their months of working together, Mahmoud still felt a small jolt of surprise whenever Nasser called him directly. The billionaire could have easily delegated their interactions to an assistant, but he never did. Everything is ready, Mahmoud assured him. The certificates are printed, the catering is confirmed, and the press will arrive at noon. Excellent. And how is Tariq feeling about his big day? Mahmoud smiled at the fact that Nasser remembered his friend's name. Nervous but excited. The hospital has already offered him a patient care position with nearly double his previous salary. That's exactly what we hoped for, Nasser said, satisfaction evident in his voice. I should be there around 11 to review everything before the ceremony. Oh, and I have a surprise for today, something I think you'll appreciate. Another surprise? Mahmoud laughed. The last one was quite enough. Thank you. The last one had been Nasser's unexpected announcement at the center's opening that Mahmoud would be named not just as program director, but as full executive director, with a salary that had allowed him to quit his other 2 jobs. Mahmoud had tried to refuse. The position was too important, he'd argued, for someone with no formal management experience. But Nasser had been adamant. Experience comes in many forms, he'd said. You've managed to keep 3 jobs while raising 3 successful children. I'd say that's more impressive than an MBA. After hanging up, Mahmoud went to check on the main event space. The staff was setting up chairs, arranging flowers, testing the microphones. Among them was a familiar face, Chen, the former hostess from LeBlanc, who now worked as the center's administrative coordinator. "Chen, how are we doing with RSVPs for today?" Mahmoud asked. "We're at full capacity," she reported, and Philippe just called to confirm the catering details. He's sending his best team. Philippe Bouvier had indeed kept his word about the catering contract, but more importantly, he had implemented the promised training program at LeBlanc. The restaurant now regularly hired graduates from the center's culinary courses, and its staff had become noticeably more diverse over the past months. As the morning progressed, Mahmoud found himself reflecting on how much had changed. Just over 6 months ago, he had been invisible to people like Philippe, just another immigrant in a service uniform, interchangeable and overlooked. Now he ran a center that was featured in the city's press, consulted with business leaders about diversity initiatives, and had even spoken at a conference about workforce development. None of it had been in his plans. All of it had stemmed from that one moment of simple human connection, of one person speaking to another in their own language. By 11, the center was buzzing with activity. Graduates in their best clothes arrived with family members, many of whom were seeing the center for the first time. Children ran through the halls while parents took photos. Volunteers guided everyone to the event space where rows of chairs faced a small stage. Nasser arrived precisely at 11, as promised. Despite his wealth and position, he moved through the crowd with an easy grace, greeting people by name, stopping to kneel and speak with children at their eye level. Unlike many powerful men, he never seemed in a hurry to end conversations with ordinary people. "Mahmoud," he called, making his way over. "Everything looks wonderful." "Thanks to your funding," Mahmoud replied. "Money is the easy part," Nasser said with a dismissive wave. "Creating something meaningful with it, that's the challenge. And that's all you." He glanced around at the gathered families. "Are you ready for my surprise?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Mahmoud said with mock resignation. Nasser gestured toward the entrance where a familiar figure had just appeared. "I invited a special guest for today's ceremony." Mahmoud squinted, then his eyes widened in recognition. "Is that—" "Your former supervisor from the hospital," Nasser confirmed. "The one who told you there was no path for advancement without a college degree. I thought he might benefit from seeing what you've accomplished." Before Mahmoud could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of a news crew. "Mr. Al-Farhan," the reporter called, "could we get a few words before the ceremony?" As Nasser stepped away to speak with the media, Mahmoud watched his former boss looking around the center with undisguised amazement. The man who had once told him to be realistic about his options was now seeing exactly what those options could be when someone bothered to create them. There was no bitterness in Mahmoud's heart, only a quiet satisfaction. He walked over to greet his former supervisor. "Welcome to the center," he said, extending his hand. "I'm glad you could join us today." The man looked startled, then embarrassed. "Mahmoud, this is impressive. When I got the invitation, I had no idea you were behind all this." "Not behind it," Mahmoud corrected gently. "Just part of it. We all have roles to play in creating change." The ceremony began at noon. The event space was filled to capacity, with people standing along the walls. On stage sat Nasser, Mahmoud, and several community leaders who had supported the center's mission. Mahmoud approached the microphone, feeling a flutter of nervousness. Public speaking had not been part of his life before the center. But as he looked out at the audience, at his children sitting in the front row, at Tariq and the other graduates, at the families who had found new hope through the center's programs, the nervousness faded. "6 months ago, this building was empty," he began. "Just walls and floors and windows. Today, it is full of dreams being realized, of lives being transformed, of people being truly seen, perhaps for the first time.